Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It all started with a letter, thick paper, golden seal, and a $20,000 fine for a fireplace. What seemed like a ridiculous mistake soon unraveled into forged documents, fake officials, and a ruthless HOA trying to steal my land. They wanted a war. They got one. It started with an envelope, thick, cream-colored paper, gold-embossed logo in the corner. Aspen Ridge Commons Homeowners Association. I almost threw it out with the junk mail. I figured it was another generic notice about neighborhood fire safety or local council elections. But something about the weight of it, the arrogance implied by the serif font, made me open it. Inside was a single sheet, stiff and self-important. The wording was bureaucratic, but the message hit like a slap. I was being fined $20,000 for an unauthorized solid fuel combustion unit in a regulated air control district. In other words, my fireplace. My century-old, hand-restored wood-burning fireplace that had stood in this stone cottage since 1908. The fireplace I'd spent weeks rebuilding with salvaged bricks and a trowel my grandfather once used to patch cathedrals in Lyon. That fireplace was now, apparently, a criminal offense. I reread the letter 3 times. It claimed that my property fell under Section 7.9 of the Aspen Ridge Commons HOA bylaws, specifically the clause prohibiting active solid fuel installations within visible proximity to shared community airspace, whatever the hell that meant. There was a deadline, of course. I had 10 business days to remit payment to avoid escalation or legal intervention. Failure to comply would result in a forced removal of the offending installation. I set the letter down and stared at it in stunned silence, then did the only reasonable thing a man can do when faced with lunacy. I made coffee. Standing in my kitchen, watching steam rise from the kettle, I tried to piece together how any of this made sense. The property was mine, 6 forested acres on the northern edge of La Plata County, Colorado, bordering a sliver of national parkland. When I bought the place 3 years ago, it was a shell, rotted roof, stone walls cracked with time and mountain weather, no gas, no insulation, but it had good bones, it had soul, and it had 0 HOA. I still had the paperwork, filed, notarized, and double-checked by the county. The previous owner had made sure of it. This land had been carved out of municipal oversight back in the 80s and never included in any development plan. That's why I bought it. That's why I live here, away from the rules, from the noise, from people like Karen. I didn't know her name yet, not officially, but I'd heard it whispered in town. Aspen Ridge Commons sat about a half-mile south, a grid of identical beige townhomes built on what used to be open grazing land. Residents there had a reputation, lots of rules, lots of fines, and a president who thought she was queen of the forest. Apparently, her kingdom had expanded. I went to my files, pulled out my deed, my exclusion map, my utility letters, everything that proved I was on my own, not part of their little HOA dystopia. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on the letter. Hello, this is the Aspen Ridge Commons office. Karen speaking. Her voice was precise, clipped, and painfully smug. I could practically hear her lip gloss forming words. Hi, Karen. My name is Nicholas Ward. I just received a letter about a fine on my property. There's been a mistake. I'm not part of your HOA. There was a pause, then a sigh that smelled of Chardonnay and Botox. Mr. Ward, if your chimney is visible from the Southern Ridge Trail, then it encroaches on our community's shared air visibility. Our bylaws are clear. Wood-burning fixtures are prohibited. We've documented the violation, and the fine is valid. Karen, I said slowly, carefully measuring each word like bricks in a foundation. I don't live in Aspen Ridge Commons. I live on private land. My property has no shared access, no shared trails, no community votes. I am not subject to your bylaws. She chuckled, an icy, brittle sound. Mr. Ward, our association is currently undergoing boundary expansion in cooperation with the county. Your parcel is within the proposed annexation zone. You'll be receiving further updates. In the meantime, the violation stands. I felt something dark crawl up the back of my neck. You can't just decide that. That's not how property law works. Then I suggest you consult an attorney. We've notified you. This call is recorded. Good day. She hung up. I stared at the phone for a full minute, wondering what the hell I had just stepped into. A bad dream. A bureaucratic prank. Or something worse. The next morning, I found a wooden stake driven into the ground by my front gate. Attached to it was a laminated sign, bold red letters screaming, "This property is under review for inclusion in Aspen Ridge Commons HOA. Unauthorized activity subject to sanction." And under it, in smaller text, "Participation in upcoming community vote is mandatory for affected parcels." I stood there, barefoot in the gravel, coffee in one hand, the cold mountain air biting my skin, staring at this sign like it was some kind of territorial warning from a rival pack. And for the first time since I moved here, I felt like someone was trying to crawl under my skin, into my home, into my life. This wasn't about community regulations. It wasn't about smoke or trails or bylaws. This was war. 2 days after the sign went up by my gate, things escalated in a way that felt both surreal and surgical. It was a Saturday morning, cold and crisp, sun filtering through pine branches and steam curling off the woodpile behind my house. I was splitting logs, half lost in the rhythm, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, slow, deliberate, like someone trying to sound official by driving uninvited up a private road. I stepped around the corner just in time to see a silver SUV pull up near the barn. 3 people stepped out, 2 men in ill-fitting windbreakers, clipboards in hand. One woman, tall, in a vest with a stitched patch that read Air Quality Coordination Task Force. It looked homemade. They didn't knock. They didn't greet me. They simply spread out and started walking toward my woodshed. "Can I help you?" I said, loudly enough to make birds scatter from the nearby pines. The woman turned with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning. Just a routine environmental compliance visit. We're checking emissions in relation to new residential impact reviews for transitional zones." There was a silence after that, one of those moments where my brain tried to translate nonsense into English and failed. "Excuse me," I said, stepping closer. She flipped through a folder, produced a piece of paper, and handed it to me. "This is an authorized field notice. According to county review files, your parcel is being transitioned into shared regulatory oversight under the Aspen Ridge Commons expansion plan. As such, air quality compliance applies." I read the document. At first glance, it looked official. County letterhead, signature, QR code, even a watermark. But something felt off. The wording was vague, and the formatting was just wrong enough to itch behind the eyes. And the signature, it was from someone named Jeffrey A. Moorman, listed as Senior Compliance Officer, Office of Environmental Transition. I'd never heard of that department. I'd never heard of him. "I'm going to stop you right here," I said. "You're on private property, without notice, without warrant, without legal standing. Step away from my structure and get back in your vehicle." One of the men raised his hands in mock peace. "Hey, sir, no need to get aggressive. We're just taking readings. This is standard for annexation procedures. You'll be getting the full packet in the mail." The woman took a step forward. "If you interfere, we'll have to document this as non-compliance. That will be noted in the Public Health Impact Report." I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff. It took 17 minutes for Deputy Hall to arrive. A square-jawed ranch kid turned lawman, the type who knew the value of property lines and didn't particularly care for HOA theatrics. The moment he stepped out of his cruiser and saw the trio poking around my woodshed with air sensors, he frowned like someone who'd found a raccoon in his boat. They tried to play it cool, handed him the same document. Hall looked it over, nodded, then walked back to his patrol car. A few minutes later, he returned with a county tablet, pulled up the actual land record, and compared signatures. His eyes narrowed. "Nick," he said quietly, "did you authorize this inspection?" "Absolutely not." "Did you sign anything recently with the county? Permit request, survey adjustment, development interest?" "No." He turned back to the trio. "Then I'm going to ask you to pack up your equipment and leave immediately." The tall woman tried to protest. "Officer, this is part of a coordinated compliance effort. The landowner's signature is on file." Hall held up a finger and cut her off. "I know that signature. I've seen Mr. Ward sign county forms before. That's not his handwriting. And if you don't leave now, I'll be treating this as criminal trespass and document fraud." That got their attention. Within minutes, the crew was back in their SUV, mumbling about misunderstandings and regional directives. As they drove off, Hall stayed behind, folding the paper and slipping it into an evidence bag. "Want me to file a report?" "Absolutely," I said, "and I want to know who the hell submitted that document." He nodded. "I'll call in a records trace, but Nick, I've got a bad feeling about this." You're not the first to deal with that HOA overreach crap lately, but this is different. This is coordinated. After he left, I went back inside and fired up my scanner. I uploaded the document, zoomed in on the signature, Jeffrey A. Mormon. I started digging. County directories, public employee databases, environmental compliance divisions. There was no such department, no such title, and, as far as I could tell, no such man. But someone had access to official-looking templates. Someone knew how to forge municipal credentials just well enough to fool a glance. And someone, Karen, had just tried to cross the line from nuisance to felon. I stayed up late that night. I pulled every deed, every plat map, every registered letter I'd ever received. I triple-checked my boundaries, the history of my parcel, and the legacy zoning ordinances. Everything confirmed what I already knew. I was outside their jurisdiction. So how the hell did they file paperwork under my name? I barely slept after the fake inspection. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those strangers wandering around my woodshed, measuring the air like they were checking for nuclear fallout. By morning, the anger had crystallized into something sharper: determination. If they wanted to play with forged documents, they had picked the wrong architect to mess with. I know structures, legal ones included, and I can spot cracks before the whole thing comes down. The first call I made was to Frank Alvarez, an old friend from university, and now a certified forensic document examiner. Frank lives in Denver, which is close enough for him to show up when trouble knocks. He's the kind of guy who treats handwriting like DNA and gets a twinkle in his eye when he suspects fraud. When I forwarded him the scan of the so-called authorization letter, he called me back before I could finish my second cup of coffee. "Nick," he said, voice already buzzing with the thrill of a puzzle, "this signature isn't just forged, it's a copy-paste job from a digital template. Whoever did this is sloppy. I can prove it blindfolded." "Good," I said, "because this is only the opening act. Next step, my attorney." I called Rachel Bishop, a local property rights lawyer who has a reputation for making developers cry. She listened quietly while I walked her through the events. The letter, Karen, the fake inspection, the fraudulent signature. When I paused, she exhaled slowly. "This is not a misunderstanding," she said. "This is a targeted annexation attempt. It's a play I've seen before. Pressure, paperwork, then eventual seizure under the guise of communal compliance." In translation, I said, "They want my land. And they think you won't fight back," she replied. "Which means we have an advantage." They underestimated the wrong guy. We drafted a legal demand, complete disclosure of all submitted annexation documents and records of who filed them. Rachel submitted it that afternoon directly to the county's planning office. If there was a paper trail, we were going to yank it into the sunlight. While Rachel handled the legal barrage, I dove into the county's public database myself. It's not elegant. Imagine a labyrinth designed by someone who hates organization. But after an hour of clicking and cursing, I found it: a newly filed change request for 3 parcels, mine included, slated for community integration under HOA. Stewardship, 3 parcels. I opened the attached files and my stomach dropped. The first parcel, Lot 37, my land. Signature, allegedly me. Except the signature was identical to the one on my house's original purchase deed. Perfect, clean, without the tiny tremor my hand picked up after a broken wrist last winter. Somebody had scraped it from an old PDF. The second parcel, a small wooded property to the east. Signature, Thomas Keating, deceased 8 years ago. Unless ghosts now fill out county paperwork, that was signature theft. The third parcel, undeveloped acreage belonging to a trust. Signature, unknown individual, but when I zoomed in, I saw something chilling. The same spacing, the same angle, the same pixel noise pattern as the others. A triple copy job. They had forged dead men, corporations, and me in one lazy sweep. There was an additional file, a statement of intent from the HOA president Karen Dexter claiming overwhelming support for the expansion. She'd even written a cheerful note about bringing historic properties up to sustainable modern code standards. Translation: bulldoze my fireplace, bulldoze my autonomy, and welcome me into beige-colored hell. I printed everything. Spread the pages across my kitchen table. It looked like a conspiracy theory crime board, except every thread led to the same villain. Karen wasn't just playing queen, she was trying to colonize. That evening, Frustration drove me into town for supplies: ink cartridges, legal pads, a new binder to store the mounting evidence of HOA idiocy. At the hardware store checkout, the clerk, a chatty retiree named Linda, asked what I was working on. I said one wrong word: HOA. Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, Lord, Aspen Ridge." "Unfortunately." "She's at it again," Linda muttered. "That woman thinks she runs the whole county." My cousin got fined because his garden gnome created visual disharmony. Sounds about right. When I returned home, the sun had dipped behind the ridge, and the sky was bruised purple. I stepped out of my truck, arms full of supplies, and froze. There, nailed to my front porch, was a new notice. Bright yellow, block letters. Impossible to ignore. Final warning: non-compliance will result in legislated correction. You have been informed. It wasn't legal language. It wasn't official, but it was a threat, a promise that someone, most likely Karen, wasn't going to wait for the law. They wanted escalation. They were going to get it. I photographed the notice, pried it off, and locked my door behind me. Then I called Frank again. "Can you come down here tomorrow?" I asked. He didn't even hesitate. "Send me your address. I'm bringing my equipment." War was no longer a metaphor. It was paperwork and trespass and nails in my porch. And I was done pretending this was anything less than a siege. Frank arrived the next morning just after 8, looking like a man on a mission and dressed like a UPS driver with a vendetta. He unloaded 2 heavy duffel bags from the back of his Jeep: scanners, magnifiers, laptops, and a portable light table. I offered him coffee. He declined in favor of adrenaline and spite. We set up shop in my dining room. He spread out the forged documents, pulled out a print of my actual signature from the original property deed, and began pointing out discrepancies like a surgeon identifying tumors. "Look here," he said, tapping the annexation request. "No pressure gradient variation, no pen lift inconsistencies. This was scanned and overlaid digitally. No human hand writes like a laser printer." "What about the other signatures?" "Thomas Keating." He snorted. "Dead since 2015. His signature on this is a recreation from his probate file, available online if you know where to dig. And this third one, that's not a person, that's a trust. Trusts don't sign anything without a trustee, and this one hasn't had one in over a decade. He compiled a full report within hours, complete with annotations, call-outs, and a side-by-side breakdown that made the forgery obvious, even to the legally blind. Meanwhile, Rachel, my attorney, had received a tepid response from the county office. A vaguely worded letter acknowledging the annexation proposal was under administrative review and that all materials had been accepted via standard protocol. Translation: nobody there had actually checked anything. Bureaucracy had done what it does best: default to stamp and file. Rachel scheduled an emergency hearing to block any procedural changes until the matter could be reviewed in court. She also drafted a cease and desist demand addressed directly to Karen Dexter and the Aspen Ridge Commons HOA, citing forged instruments, fraudulent annexation, and trespass. We served it that evening via certified courier. And just to be safe, I also nailed a laminated copy to the gate next to their sign. But that wasn't enough for me. This wasn't a private scuffle anymore. Karen was operating like a small-time dictator, and I was tired of playing defense. I wanted a crowd, so I gave them one. That night, I sent a carefully worded email to the Durango Sentinel, complete with attachments, the fake signature comparisons, the unauthorized inspection photos, even the front porch final warning notice in its proud, psychotic font. The subject line read, "HOA uses forged documents to seize private property. Architect fights back." The next morning, I was on the front page. The photo they ran showed me standing in front of my stone cottage, arms crossed, chimney smoking gently behind me like a defiant middle finger to bureaucracy. The headline read, "They want to tear out my fireplace and steal my land." By lunchtime, I had 3 interview requests, one from a Denver radio station, one from a Colorado Springs blog focused on property rights, and one, unbelievably, from a syndicated national reporter at CBS who'd seen the article online and wanted to shine a light on HOA overreach. Social media did the rest. Within 24 hours, the post had gone viral. On Twitter, people were calling me the Fireplace guy. On Facebook, locals were flooding the HOA's public page with angry comments and memes of burning chimneys captioned, "Not today, Karen." That same afternoon, two strangers pulled up outside my fence in a pickup and handed me a box of firewood. "For the cause," the driver said with a grin. "And we signed the petition." "What petition?" He nodded toward his phone. "Someone started a change.org. Save Nick's Fireplace. It's got almost 12,000 signatures. I'll admit it, that made me laugh. But it also made something clear. I wasn't fighting this alone anymore." Karen, however, was not amused. The following day, I received a formal notice from the Environmental Protection Agency, an official letter alleging that my chimney was producing potentially hazardous particulates that may affect adjacent communities, and that an open violation case had been initiated under the Clean Air Act. The timing was surgical, too perfect to be coincidence. Rachel confirmed what I suspected. The complaint had been filed by a third party affiliated with Aspen Ridge Commons, and buried in the EPA report was a supporting letter from Karen Dexter herself. She had escalated from HOA shenanigans to federal complaints. Rachel's tone over the phone was tight and furious. "This is a harassment campaign wrapped in environmentalism, but it's fragile. She's using real agencies to push fake claims. We can counter it, but we have to move fast." I was ready. We gathered statements from neighbors affirming that no one smelled smoke, saw soot, or even noticed my fireplace unless they were staring through binoculars from the Southern Trail. Frank compiled a supplemental report proving the EPA's particulate thresholds were nowhere near triggered by a single residential chimney in an open forested zone. Rachel submitted a countersuit for malicious misuse of regulatory process. The pressure was mounting, but so was support. The Durango Sentinel ran a follow-up story titled, "HOA Goes Federal, Bureaucratic Overreach or Coordinated Fraud." That same evening, someone, anonymous, posted drone footage online showing Karen's own backyard with a propane fire pit and an old, wood-burning pizza oven behind her pool house. The hypocrisy exploded like napalm. The clip got over 200,000 views in a weekend. By the end of the week, HOA board members were starting to distance themselves from Karen publicly. One even contacted Rachel anonymously to say, "She forged things. I didn't sign off on this. I'll testify if it goes to court." Good, because we were just getting started. The knock on my door didn't sound like a neighborly hello. It was deliberate. 3 raps, spaced like a metronome. I opened it to find a man and a woman in dark windbreakers, both holding badges, flanked by 2 sheriff's deputies standing a few feet back with folded arms and the expressions of men who'd rather be anywhere else. The man spoke first. "Nicholas Ward." I nodded. "We're with the County Code Enforcement Division. We're here to conduct a site compliance inspection related to air quality violations. We have a court-issued administrative access order. You are required to allow entry." He held up a folded document like it was radioactive. I took it, read it, and immediately spotted the trick. It wasn't a judge's warrant. It was a temporary administrative order signed by a county clerk under petition from the HOA's legal counsel, based on the still unproven EPA complaint. It granted them access to evaluate environmental compliance on a parcel under review for HOA integration. "This property isn't under review," I said sharply. "This property isn't part of any HOA." And that petition was submitted using forged documents, which is currently the subject of a lawsuit. The woman stepped forward. "Sir, we're not here to debate ownership. We're here to do our job. If you deny access, we'll have to notify the court." I could feel my jaw tense. I stepped aside, gestured toward the side yard. "You want to inspect something? Go measure the air under my pine tree. Just don't touch anything." They did exactly that, but with the subtle drama of people trying to make it look important. The man walked around with a handheld air sensor the size of a Game Boy. The woman took photos of my chimney from different angles, muttering into a recorder. Meanwhile, one of the deputies, trying to act casual, started asking me if I'd always lived out here. "No," I said, watching them like a hawk. "I bought this place 2 years ago. Spent a year restoring it." "You do all that stonework yourself?" he asked. "Every inch." He whistled, nodding. Hell of a job. After 20 minutes of huffing around and collecting invisible particles, the enforcement team left without comment, promising I'd receive an assessment notice in the mail. They never stepped inside the house. I made sure of it. Rachel was livid when she read the order. They're abusing administrative loopholes now. This was a fast-tracked compliance order piggybacking off a fake EPA complaint. Karen's weaponizing bureaucracy to create a paper trail, but we'll bury them in affidavits. She filed an emergency injunction the next day to suspend all enforcement actions until the forgery case was adjudicated. But by then, the HOA had taken it up another level. A week later, I came home to find a bright yellow sign staked in my front yard. It read, "Non-compliant structure removal pending environmental adjudication," with a logo for Aspen Ridge Commons HOA and a forged signature of a county review officer underneath. I ripped it out of the ground and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff McConnell met me in person. He was a no-nonsense man with a tired stare and hands like baseball mitts. He read the sign, frowned, and said, "This isn't legal. They don't have enforcement authority outside their zone, and you're not in it. They're acting like I am." He sighed and pulled out a file. "We've been getting complaints about that HOA for months. Noise enforcement, water use fines, landscaping demands outside their jurisdiction. But this is fraud." He photographed the sign, filed a report, and agreed to assign a deputy to my property for the next few days, just in case. That night, I got a call from Frank. I traced the digital origin of the forged signatures. He said, they were scanned from old permits submitted back in 2019. The IP logs show the uploads came from a computer registered to the HOA's legal office. "You're saying they forged my consent documents using my own building permits?" "Exactly. I've got the time-stamped evidence, and I'm bringing in my contact from the state licensing board. They'll certify this as manipulation of public records." By now, the EPA complaint had been publicly challenged by 3 environmental consultants who called it procedurally baseless. The Durango Sentinel was running a third article, this one, titled "HOA's Fraudulent Push for Power? Fireplace Fight Sparks Statewide Backlash." Emails were pouring in, some from lawyers offering pro bono help, others from homeowners with similar stories. Chimneys fined, yards trespassed, trees trimmed without consent. Rachel said what I was thinking. "You're not just a target anymore, you're a precedent." Karen, cornered but not quiet, fired back through HOA channels. She posted a statement claiming that I had willfully contaminated the shared atmosphere and that my defiance was an act of reckless endangerment to community health. She cited obscure zoning codes no longer on the books and quoted case law from states 3 jurisdictions away. The HOA also filed an official motion requesting court-ordered removal of my chimney due to public safety violations. That was it. I told Rachel, "Let's go nuclear." She smiled, not kindly. "Then it's time we go after them for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy." By the end of the week, we had filed a civil suit naming the HOA, Karen Dexter, and their in-house counsel. We also submitted evidence to the county prosecutor's office and requested a full criminal investigation into document falsification, attempted property annexation, and malicious regulatory abuse. My fireplace hadn't just become a symbol, it had become legal dynamite. The morning after we filed the civil suit, I found a man sitting in an old Ford Ranger parked just beyond my fence line, engine off, windows rolled down. He wasn't doing anything overtly suspicious, just sipping coffee from a thermos and watching my house like he was waiting for a bird to land. I walked over with my phone out, camera ready. He rolled his window down. "Mr. Ward." "Depends," I said. "Are you with code enforcement, HOA security, or the amateur theater club masquerading as federal agents this week?" He gave a short laugh. "None of the above. My name's Ben Caro. Used to work for the La Plata County Land Services Office. I was terminated last month after a so-called departmental restructuring. But the real reason? I wouldn't sign off on the HOA's expansion documents. That got my attention." He reached into a manila envelope on the passenger seat and held out a stack of papers, sealed in plastic sleeves. "These are internal memos, emails, and staff notes. They show how Karen Dexter and her legal team pressured a senior official, Walter C. Drummond, to process the annexation paperwork despite the absence of required landowner consent. They forged multiple affidavits, including yours. The digital logs were scrubbed after submission, but I made personal backups before they wiped my access. Why are you giving this to me? Because I'm not the only one they tried to silence. And frankly, I don't want to see this state eaten alive by HOA tyrants who think they can redraw maps with a Sharpie and a smile." I didn't waste time. I brought the file straight to Rachel. Her eyes widened with every page. "This is gold," she whispered. "Authenticated email chains, change tracking logs, digital fingerprinting. This isn't just a civil violation anymore. This is conspiracy to defraud a government agency, criminal misrepresentation, tampering with public records." She immediately contacted the district attorney's office and scheduled a deposition for Ben. Within 24 hours, the DA's investigators were knocking on Karen's door, and subpoenas were flying out like confetti at a bad parade. Karen responded by doubling down. She called an emergency HOA meeting, recorded it, and posted it to the Aspen Ridge Commons website with dramatic music, as if it were a public service announcement. In the video, she stood in front of a fake fireplace, looked straight into the camera, and said, "We are under siege by individuals who wish to undermine our values, our safety, and our environmental commitments. These attacks are orchestrated by fringe extremists hiding behind claims of property freedom, but we will not be intimidated." Someone must have told her she sounded like a cartoon villain, because within a day, the video was pulled down. But not before it went viral with the title, "Karen Declares War on Chimneys." Meanwhile, the air in my house remained stubbornly warm and smoky in all the right ways. The EPA, under increasing pressure, released an interim statement. "There is no active investigation into Mr. Ward. The complaint in question lacked sufficient basis for federal review." Boom, their biggest bluff collapsed. But it didn't stop there. Ben revealed something else. The HOA had created a future integration overlay map, a digital zoning plan that reclassified over a dozen private parcels, including mine, as probationary within their proposed HOA borders. They had submitted it to the county as part of a larger community development grant application. If they get approval for that grant, Ben explained, they'll have the funding and leverage to enforce new codes retroactively. So Karen wasn't just trying to find me, she was trying to rewrite the geography. If she succeeded, my property wouldn't just be under threat. It could be annexed by default if I didn't contest it at the zoning board within 30 days. Rachel got to work fast. She contacted a friend at the local NBC affiliate. They ran a piece titled, "Can HOAs Annex Private Land?" One homeowner says, "Not on my watch." I did the interview sitting in front of my stone fireplace, the flames burning behind me like a middle finger to bureaucracy. I told them about the forgery, the surveillance, the legal threats, the inspection ambush. The reporter asked me why I thought this was happening. "Because I didn't ask permission to exist," I said. And that terrifies them. The story aired during prime time. The next morning, Rachel's phone blew up. Lawyers, legislators, homeowners, retired judges, all offering support or information. That same day, the La Plata County Commission halted the HOA's zoning petition pending further review, citing material inconsistencies in ownership consent documentation. Karen, now neck-deep in lawsuits, made her boldest move yet. She filed an emergency injunction claiming that I was operating an illegal combustion appliance in violation of emergency fire risk provisions, citing wildfire regulations that only applied to unincorporated woodland during red flag warnings. We weren't even in a red flag period. This was war by paperwork, and she wasn't done throwing grenades. But this time, we had something better than grenades. We had Ben, and now we had momentum. By the time we walked into the courtroom, the air felt electric. Not dramatic like on TV, more like the dry charge before a lightning storm. Karen sat across the aisle, powdered and polished, pretending she was too important to be here. Her lawyer looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Mine didn't blink once. The judge, a weathered woman with reading glasses halfway down her nose, didn't waste time. "We're here regarding Ward v. Aspen Ridge Commons HOA and others. Let's begin." Rachel started with a simple phrase. "Your Honor, this case concerns deliberate forgery, trespass, and attempted coercion under the false authority of a homeowners association to which my client does not and has never belonged." She laid it all out. The fake documents, the false petition, Ben's testimony, the digital footprint from the land office. Each item dropped like a nail into the HOA's legal coffin. Karen's lawyer objected, redirected, and fumbled. But every time he tried to pivot, Rachel had a copy of the document he was trying to deny. When Ben testified, he was calm and precise. They forged landowner consent, used fake affidavits, and misrepresented zoning maps to push through an expansion that had no legal basis. Karen's face twitched for the first time. Then came the twist. The judge asked, Is the chimney still in use? Yes, I said. It's my primary heat source. There's no gas line. Karen's lawyer tried to claim it was a health hazard, citing made-up emission stats. Rachel handed over lab-certified results from an independent air quality test. Compliant and safe, the judge murmured. In the end, the judge granted a temporary injunction. The HOA was forbidden from any further contact, enforcement, or communication with me. They were also barred from submitting additional zoning proposals involving my parcel. Karen looked like she'd swallowed glass. The courtroom emptied, but she stayed behind, staring at the bench like it had betrayed her. Outside, I lit a cigarette just for the irony of it. Rachel grinned. That was the sound of their empire cracking. But this wasn't over. We still had the criminal probe, still had the press closing in. And deep down, I knew Karen had one last desperate card to play. They tried to delay the inevitable. Karen's lawyer filed motions, pleaded for continuances, even argued that the original signatures might have been misunderstood rather than forged. But the DA didn't flinch. The grand jury returned the indictment like clockwork: conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of public records, filing false instruments, and attempted unlawful seizure of private property. Karen was arrested outside her gated community, handcuffed beside her white Lexus, heels clicking against the asphalt as she screamed about property values and community order. The news vans caught every second of it. By sundown, she was national. The trial was brutal. Evidence poured in like floodwater. Ben testified again, this time with records from the HOA's internal server, emails between Karen and the fired land office clerk discussing quietly folding in the outer parcels. One line stuck with me: "We just need the chimneys gone before winter. They're an eyesore and a liability." The judge didn't need much convincing. 14 years in prison without parole for at least 7. The HOA itself, what was left of it, was fined $620,000 and ordered to reverse all voluntary expansions initiated in the last 2 years. Several current members resigned within the hour. Some of them called me later, apologized. I used the settlement money to host a seminar, "Your Property, Your Rights: Defending Landowners from HOA Overreach." We held it in the county library with lawyers, planners, and a few good cops in attendance. Rachel gave a talk. So did Ben. The room was full. As for my home, nothing's changed. The chimney still burns at night, soft orange light flickering across the stone walls I rebuilt by hand. The air smells like cedar and ash. There's a new sign on the front gate now. Polished brass. It reads, "Private land, no HOA. Chimney protected by law." I haven't heard from Karen since the trial. No letters, no threats, no smoke in the air except my own. Sometimes neighbors stop by. They bring firewood, ask questions. One even called my house a monument. I don't know about that, but I do know this. When you stand your ground, sometimes that's all it takes for the world to shift a little more in the right direction.